getting their last moment rejuvenation for Seth. I'm going to welcome you into the space. Can everyone hear me okay?
Project for the owl.
Hello. Is that better?
Just let them know it's on Zoom.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And the owl, the people who are on the screen, we welcome you into this space. My name is Renee Yancey, and I'm the president and CEO of the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia. And I'm seeing some friendly faces in the room, but you may not know this, but this is a topic near and dear to me, fundraising, and that's one of the conversations that we're going to delve into today, along with storytelling. And we're excited to launch in collaboration with our colleagues in Loudoun County. So Nicole, thank you for your partnership. We're really grateful to have you as our side-by-side partner. And this topic of fundraising and storytelling, we're all in the communities, we're pursuing growth for our organizations, and really pleased to bring our colleague Seth Klukoff to the room. So Seth and I worked together many, many years ago at an organization called Equal Measure. I'll just tell you a quick little story. So Seth helped to launch the Equal Measure's thought leadership platform and content, and its approach to being public about the work they do. So what's Equal Measure? It is a consulting firm, primarily research and evaluation, and our clients were philanthropists, largely larger foundations. But just as I was coming on board to Equal Measure, the organization had undergone a branding and name change. So the name of the organization had gotten shortened to an acronym that was called the OMG Center for Collaborative Leadership Learning. So OMG Center, it meant something in its day that was different than what OMG means today. So as you can imagine, we needed some serious rebranding. And funny other quick little tidbit about Equal Measure, formerly the OMG Center. I was a client of OMG Center before, I'd hired them to do an evaluation of a program I had developed. So this is all these kind of full circle moments. So Seth is really, was our branding guru. He was our thought leadership guru, and every proposal that went out the door, Seth and our communications with our philanthropy clients, Seth was at the helm of those. So you're in very good hands this morning. I'm eager to get to know Seth in this new way, in his new role. And then I'm just going to brag on you one more time, Seth. The work that he did to elevate the firm, we were a nonprofit firm for research and evaluation, attracted the attention of Mackenzie Scott. And so the organization received one of those, surprise, here's a grant from Mackenzie Scott. So again, we can't promise a Mackenzie Scott grant, but we can promise you a meaningful conversation. And I hope that you will bring your questions, your insights, your knowledge. I'm a firm believer that the knowledge and, quote, if you will, the back of the room needs to come into the front of the room. And so collectively, I know we'll have a dynamic conversation today. So with that, welcome. Thank you. Am I turning it over to Seth now? Seth, over to you.
Renee, thanks so much for that introduction. And yes, I think, you mentioned the Mackenzie Scott donation, and it's funny because this was sort of during the earlier days of Mackenzie Scott, and I remember we received the email from them, and we really didn't know who it was from initially, and we thought maybe it was one of those, we'll say scam emails that, okay, well, maybe you read it, like, do we respond to this? Do we not respond to this? And so we were like a nanosecond from deleting it, but but thank goodness we didn't. But I feel like they've become a little bit, Mackenzie Scott and her team have become a little bit more intentional and I think organized about their approach. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but great to be here this morning. I really want to thank Renee, you and your team at the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia and the team at the Community Foundation for Loudoun and Northern Fauquier counties. Really looking forward to our session this morning. I think we'll be covering quite a bit of material in our time together, but there'll be opportunities, where I'll kind of, mention these are some takeaways. These are things that I'll highlight, and you'll all have an opportunity to have a copy of this deck with the sites and the resources following the session as well. So if there's anything that I talk about and you miss, you'll have an opportunity to kind of come back to that content as well. We'll have a couple of places where we'll pause and give you an opportunity to kind of do some thinking around this and respond. And we'll have Q&A at the end of our session as well. So yeah, let's jump right into it. And we'll do that with a question. And we'd love to know, because we're going to be talking today about sustaining and scaling and fundraising and communications and thought leadership, all of those things. And we'd just like to hear from you to kind of kick this off. What's top of mind for you as you're thinking about sustaining your programs? And we'll do that through a poll. You can see up here on the screen the information of that. There's a QR code that you could scan. You could join by text. So I think we'll kind of go from here. You can see the information there if you want to take a few minutes to respond to this question, and then we'll be able to share your responses to the full group, both in person at the foundation and online as well. All right, this is great. Really seeing a lot of really good responses on here. Donors, funding, of course, growing. We'll talk a little bit about that today as well. Programs, seeing a lot of support for. And yeah, I think a lot of the words that we see here on the screen, innovation, thank you, definitely an innovation. Yeah, I think all sort of tied together. So yeah, I think we'll kind of move on from here. This is great to see, and I think we'll have an opportunity to come back to your questions and some of these pieces of content as well. All right, so thank you very much for taking the time to do that. So let's jump right into the agenda. So, what we'll do is we're going to start with the broader context of the national landscape and the climate for philanthropy. We really want to be able to kind of set the context for the fundraising work. And then what we'll do is we'll segue into what are the 8 major trends in philanthropy. And then we'll then shift to the implications of that landscape for your approaches to scaling and sustainability. So we want to kind of start with the broader context and move down to the work that you're doing in your communities with your organizations. Then we'll spend some time talking about audience. We'll talk about different types of audiences, kind of a simplified way to think about audience. What are potential ways to get on the radar of different audiences, and then how to make the ask or the pitch as well. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll have time for open discussion and Q&A at the end. And then I also put together some leave behind tools that I'll share as well, and you'll have an opportunity to have those along with the full presentation, following our time today. So there are 3 broad goals for our session. You can see them here. One is, really to just kind of share a perspective on the broader national philanthropic landscape and its implications for fundraising, for the work that you're doing to scale and sustain your work. And then we'll talk about what you can do to engage with audiences for fundraising within the broader context of these national trends. And then, as I mentioned just before, give you tools that you could take to continue to do your work in this area as well. So, before we get started, just again, wanted to kind of summarize, I guess, the point of view for our session together here. We want to set the broader context and its implications for how you think about scaling and sustaining your work. And then, starting with the broader context will, I think, really provide more definition to how you consider audiences and approaches, and then ultimately your ask. So you could see that here. So now let's move into the national climate for giving. So, to provide broader context for our conversation, I'll lead with a general overview of the climate for giving today, and then I'll segue to what I think are some key trends in philanthropy as well. So as you can see, we'll kind of start really broad. In 2023, the estimated, total estimated charitable giving in the US was around $557 billion. That's actually about a 1.9 increase from 2022. But also I say 1.9 increase in pencil, because when you factor inflation into the mix, which is kind of ran at around 4.1%. When you adjust that for inflation, giving actually declined by around 2% in 2023. And it'll be interesting to see what that trend looks like as we start gathering the numbers for 2024. I think broadly giving in 2023 was partly driven by the growth of the stock market, by the GDP, which would naturally support increases in giving by corporations and foundations, and to some degree by individuals as well. Growth in personal income and consumer spending also elevated individual giving too. Well, let's unpack those categories of giving. And I think these numbers, really reflect the economic circumstances of the past year, including rising inflation, which peaked at the end of 2022, but remained relatively high throughout most of 2023, and I think before starting to decline toward the end of last year and into this year, on a relatively gradual level. So, as you see here, giving by individuals declined by about 2.4% when you adjust that for inflation. But as giving by individuals declined, giving by foundations in particular has increased. And it's grown, 4 out of the last 5 years. And I think that's in particular, DAFs are, starting to pick up speed as a popular giving method for high value donors and foundations as well. So that's one of the reasons there. Also, according to the Curtis Group, giving to foundations is also now well above the pre-pandemic levels, indicating that wealthy donors who tend to give to grant-making organizations are continuing to do so, and probably at a higher rate going forward as well. For corporate giving, the 5-year growth rate for corporate giving is around 14.3%. And so that's really grown a lot over the past 4 to 5 years. And we'll talk more about corporate giving as we get into the trends, spoiler alert. But corporate philanthropy in particular is growing as more companies are starting to offer a wide range of giving opportunities for employees. According to Double the Donation organization, more small and mid-sized companies are now getting involved in corporate philanthropy as well, and more businesses are starting to adopt more employee-driven giving programs like matching gifts and so forth. And then as we kind of narrow this down to particular sectors, you can see them here. There's been a really interesting growth in certain sectors, and also these really align with the kind of topic and giving priorities of both community foundations here today. The public society benefit number has increased, and what that means, just to kind of give that more definition, that's kind of a combination of social services organizations, but also organizations that focus on civic society, democracy. And so it's natural that you'd see an increase there in 2023, and certainly that's going to be trending upward this year as we kind of go into the presidential election in a month. So that's sort of the larger national scope. Within the context of that national climate, I'd like to share 8 trends affecting philanthropic giving. It's important to note that these are by no means exhaustive. They're based on what people are talking about and thinking about and reading about right now. And it's also important to note that, as you'll see, a number of these trends overlap as well. I don't think you don't have 8 siloed trends here. And a little bit later on, we'll have an opportunity for you to share what you're seeing as trends as well. Do they align with what I'm sharing or going to share here? Is there something that I'm missing? Is something else that you think we should flag as well? So that'll be one question for a little bit later. So the first trend is the rise of big bet philanthropy, primarily with an emphasis on place. We talked about Mackenzie Scott earlier. You're starting to see more of an organized and intentional effort around Mackenzie Scott's giving through her Yield Giving organization. Melinda French Gates through her Pivotal Ventures organization, which focuses specifically on issues affecting caregiving, mental health, paid family and medical leave, healthcare, and then the organization, or the quasi-organization Lever for Change, which is part of the MacArthur Foundation. And what they're doing is they're doing a couple things. One is they're administering big bet programs right now for Mackenzie Scott and Pivotal Ventures. And then they're also administering big bet grant making for other organizations as well. They're sort of like the middle organization to do that. So one example recently is a program that they're administering for the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. It's their Gulf Futures Challenge, which opened up this past June. And that's an organization, that's a project that's going to focus on creating a safer and more sustainable future in the U.S. Gulf Coast region, and that's also kind of a collective impact big bet opportunity. So a number of organizations can pool together and collaborate for that opportunity. Another example is, I'm sure you've all heard, right, the MacArthur Foundation's 100 and Change which is ramping up again. That's the competition for a single $100 million gift for one organization or partnership of organizations. Second funding trend is around trust-based philanthropy, or the continued evolution of trust-based philanthropy, now with a little bit more of an emphasis on providing unrestricted and funds for capacity building support and direct TA support as well. This is also, as you know, participatory grant making, participatory learning, but ultimately it's aimed at creating more opportunities for grantee power sharing and opportunities for greater grantee voice, all of which is rooted in equity. And as I mentioned before, a goal of some trust-based philanthropy strategies is to provide multi-year unrestricted funding as well. And potentially even, funds for general operating support too, which can really strengthen the capacity and organizational health and resilience of an organization. Probably over the last maybe 2 years or so in particular, trust-based philanthropy practices have really become more and more embedded in philanthropies of different sizes and function around the country. It's really no longer becoming this thing that we'd like to do. It's becoming this thing that we do. And how can we start doing it better and making it more open to organizations in our community, both in terms of funding, voice, and also capacity building. Third trend is around, the emerging influence of younger donors, Gen Z, millennials. We've read a lot about that lately. We've heard about, this is the greatest generational wealth transfer in the history of the world, and it's happening right now. And according to the New York Times, by 2045 or through 2045, I think it's like $84 trillion will pass mostly from baby boomers to Gen X, and then millennials, and then ultimately towards Gen Z. And then what's more, and this is, I think, important for our conversation here, an estimated $12 trillion of that will find its way into philanthropy, either through foundations, donor-advised funds, impact investing, or just personal direct action. I think on the Gen Zs and also the millennials, there's a recent report from the organization Classy.org, which does a lot of work on Gen Z and millennial giving. And the stat was, Gen Z and millennial donors are 3 times as likely to advocate on an organization's behalf, compared to their parents or to their grandparents. And that for the next generation of philanthropy, the act of giving is just one facet of their engagement, but they want to be seen as volunteers or advocates or change makers. And we'll talk a little bit later about different activities, but opportunities to engage Gen Z and millennials in the organization, whether through advisory groups or boards or volunteer opportunities, is one strategy. Crowdsourcing, we've seen much more of these days, use of crowdsourcing platforms like GoFundMe, Classy, PayPal, Giving, Venmo, giving directly, and so forth. Fourth trend, we talked just before about, corporations and philanthropy and, consistent engagement by corporations, whether corporate foundations, community relations departments of foundations, of corporations, direct employee giving, different ways, different types of, corporate giving going on right now. One significant reason for that, and really we've seen this over the past 4 to 5 years, have been just the impetus of different global events and national events, right? The pandemic spurred a lot of giving, the racial awakening and reckoning in 2020, and since then has spurred a lot of corporate engagement. Climate, of course, has spurred a lot of corporate involvement as well. And those areas have really sort of informed a lot of the corporate action that we've seen. We've also seen corporations start to get a little bit more engaged in their communities, kind of trying to fill gaps in communities on different topics, different issue areas like education, connectivity in different communities, giving historically marginalized populations a greater voice and say over efforts in their communities, more corporate collaboration with governments and nonprofits as well. And then looking at different ways to get engaged in funding. So for example, there's the Pledge 1% movement that a number of corporations are focusing on right now. And that's, what that's about is many high growth companies are dedicating 1% of their stock equity to fund their corporate philanthropy. Other corporations are starting to establish public charities rather than a private foundation. Fifth trend is intermediaries. And intermediaries providing funding for topical or kind of issue-based areas like education, healthcare, food security, climate, and also place-based, kind of really focusing on particular communities. There are different types of intermediary organizations, different purposes. I think the ones we'll talk about here are really organizations that re-grant funds from foundations, or they'll kind of act as re-granters, or they'll kind of pool funds together and then grant those out. Several weeks ago, the Center for Effective Philanthropy, CEP, released a study on intermediaries, and it was interesting in terms of how grantees think about intermediary organizations. So, for instance, grantees reported slightly more open and communication and frequent communication from intermediary funders. On the other hand, they felt that intermediary funders funded slightly lower in different areas compared to other funder relationships that they had. And so also according to the study, grantees of intermediary funders are slightly less likely to receive multi-year or unrestricted grants. And the grants that they do receive tend to be maybe a little bit smaller, maybe for 2 to 3 years, with a potential capacity building built into it and capacity building and TA tail to the work, but not necessarily at as high a level as potentially some other funders might be giving. Examples of intermediaries include, Blue Meridian, the Groundswell Fund, which focuses on reproductive and social justice issues. The Conservation Lands Foundation is another example. Bridgespan, the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, or Just a Few Jobs for the Future sometimes tends to get engaged in intermediary work as well. Sixth trend is around impact investing and social venture capital. And you'll see some similarities here between what I shared just before around corporate giving. So again, like corporations, impact investors tend to gravitate more towards kind of broader societal challenges, climate, systemic racism, and gender inequities, access to education and healthcare, apprenticeships. That tends to be a kind of a newer focus from impact investors and social venture capitalists right now. Some examples, Citigroup and Bank of America both made $1 billion pledges to address the racial wealth gap. SoftBank launched a $100 million impact investing fund for entrepreneurs of color. According to the Climate Policy Initiative, there's been a lot of impact investing over the past decade around, minimizing the increase in global temperatures or trying to mitigate the effects of climate change as well. And impact investors can be a pretty diverse group. It could be traditional foundations like Kellogg Foundation. It could be organizations like JP Morgan Chase, Prudential Financial. It could be smaller organizations that pull together a number of donors for impact investing purposes as well. I think with social venture capitalists, you're starting to see more movement now towards providing, maybe some direct support and guidance into the organizations in which they invest. So are there opportunities to help build these organizations' capacity around around operations, administration, potentially program development, impact measurement. So starting to see more movement there. Some organizations that are doing a lot of work right now in impact investing and social venture capital that I would recommend as additional resources would be SOCAP, GIN, which is the Global Impact Investing Network, the Social Venture Network, Social Enterprise Alliance, and there are others to check out as well. Seventh trend is around funder collaboratives, and I think the continued exploration of these types of structures. So funder collaboratives aren't really limited to any particular type of structure. I mean, some could be a group of individuals, it could be family-based, it could be a group of foundations, could be a group of corporations, all of which are coming together to fund around a particular topic or set of topics. Some examples would be, there are structures that have, a fully integrated strategy and typically with a decision-making authority resting with the lead funder, sort of the, lead funder of funders. So they would tend to be the manager of the funder collaborative. Pooled fund collaboratives are really starting to pick up right now, where contributors put their money into a common pot, so to speak, and funds are distributed from that pot. So we saw that really tend to pick up during COVID when a number of foundations came together to pool their funds across sector to provide relief for COVID and infrastructure support and resiliency support. Another example of pooled funding is the Giving Circle model. And of course, the Impact Fund here, which invests in Loudoun County, is a really, I think, really good example of what a Giving Circle can do. As I mentioned before, many collaboratives are hosted by an intermediary. So, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, Bridgespan, you see them, often tend to be at the head or sort of taking on an organizer role for funder collaboratives. And some examples of funder collaboratives would be, there's the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. There is the funding collaborative behind the Aspen Institute's Opportunity Youth Forum. There is the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative. There is the Build Health Challenge, which is led by the de Beaumont Foundation in Washington, which focuses on healthcare in different communities around the country. And Education First, which focuses on, it's a collaborative to focus on advocating for improved Common Core standards in different states across the country. And then the last of the 8 trends, and certainly not the least by any stretch, but really about trends in trends in federal funding. And this has sort of been an consistent increase over the past few years in topics like, as you can see here, climate, STEM, education, workforce, apprenticeships I would put in there, emerging technology, so open AI, different types of AI as well. Would kind of go there. I think it's important to note here too that these federal funding priorities are often mirrored or reflected in state and regional and local funding decisions as too, so they're kind of taking their cue from where sort of the federal dollars are going. So I covered a lot there in terms of the trends and the national context. And you'll have links to these resources and reports that I cited in the version of this deck that you'll receive as well. So after kind of talking about this broader context for giving and highlighting these trends, I'd like to now kind of shift the focus to what this all means for you in your own fundraising and sustainability approaches, and that'll really be the focus of our time going forward. So this, as you see here, this is the guiding question for the next part of our session. We covered a lot of information in the previous section, but I think all of this information is important context to consider as you kind of think about what's best for your organization and your programs, which trend or combination of trends, really make the most sense for you to kind of think about as you kind of think about scaling and sustaining your work and trying to, raise funds to do that. So you can see the question here, drawing from your knowledge of the landscape and trends, how can you best position yourself to diversify and expand your fundraising? So I think the place to start is with audience. I think audience is probably the most important aspect of this whole, whole approach. And we'll spend our time going forward really kind of thinking about and addressing some questions around audience. And you can see these are, I think, the 5 questions here. So who do you know? Who do you want to know? What can you and the prospective funder learn? How can you get on their radar? And then ultimately, what is the ask? And so we'll kind of get in a little bit to each of those here. So let's talk about, I call these relationship spheres. And I think, when you start to talk about audience, I think it could sometimes be, I think, a very daunting experience. There are a lot of frameworks out there, a lot of theories, a lot of approach, I think a lot of dollars, honestly, are spent in audience identification and how do we know who we should pitch to. And I've always thought that, sometimes we tend to overdo it. We overthink it or make it too complex. So I like to kind of think about audiences in terms of these 2 spheres here. So the sphere of who do you know? Who's in your sort of direct circle? Which organizations, individuals, friends, colleagues, peers, who's in that circle? And then who do you want to know? It's a bigger circle, people kind of out there, but who are people that you want to get on their radar, that you think might be important to get to know, just in terms of furthering your work, sharing the influence and impact of your work, and ultimately trying to engage them to help scale and support and sustain your work as well. So I think, but within these 2 spheres, the who do you know and the who do you want to know, I think there are 4 common questions that you can ask yourself that I think are relevant to both. And you can see them here. Who shares passion? Who shares your passion for the work? That's really important. If there's not that link of passion and just a real feeling for the work, sort of a combination of the head and the heart, that really needs to be there first. So who do you know? Who do you want to know that you think, kind of shares that passion for your work? Who can you learn from? And what can they learn from you as well? I think, and a very important part of kind of getting on the radar and ultimately making the ask is, moving away from what could be seen as a transactional conversation and making it more of a sort of thought partnership or a strategic kind of conversation as well. I think that makes you more of a part. They see you as more of a partner, more of a co-strategist, potential co-designer as well. Who can become a partner in different programs or events, different ways to kind of get on their radar, so you don't have to go it alone. And then who might unlock a potential program, or development opportunity or funding opportunity too. Both from your inner circle, the who do you knows, and then from who do you want to know. So I think these are really, 4 questions focused on these 2 spheres. To me, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think this is kind of a simple way to kind of go about doing this. And so what I'd like to do now, because I've been talking a lot, is to give you about maybe 5 minutes, let's say, to kind of on your own, just kind of think about this. Think about, who do you know? Which audiences do you know? Which individuals or organizations do you know that you might want to reach out to help, scale or sustain your work? who are some organizations that you want to know, and then to kind of start answering, some of these questions here too. This is just strictly individual. We're not going to share these out or anything like that. And you'll see that we have a tool that helps you do this a little bit later on as well. So let's take about the next, let's say 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, and we'll come right back.
Like written with volunteers.
Right. Exactly.
Secret sauce.
All right, we'll just take about another minute or two, and then we will move on. All right. So thank you for taking the time to do that. And as I mentioned before, one of the tools that I'll be sharing is a worksheet to help you kind of take that, customize it for your own organization as well. But just to kind of start putting some of what we're talking about here into practice. I talked before, one of the questions around audience is around, what can we learn from other And so I put together, some example questions here. You see, this is, like if your organization, let's say for the purpose of this example, focuses on education or workforce development, and you're kind of looking for funding or to kind of build programs in that particular area, you could see the different types of questions, to kind of bring into that conversation or to kind of help think about how you might want to frame that conversation. So, how might your work bring additional knowledge on this topic? How can we add value and strategy and content to what this potential funder is doing or wants to do? What are they doing right now? Are those programs planning any additional funding opportunities, extensions, or expansions? In this case, what impact have the funders' programs achieved for youth, and are there opportunities for the work, for the work that we do to help, make a further difference there or improve what they've been trying to do? Are there new programs focusing on, in this case, education and workforce development that might be able to benefit from what you do? And then again, kind of getting to relationships. Do you know anybody at that foundation or any decision makers or program leads, board members potentially? Or and then how can you kind of leverage or start kind of building on those relationships? And if not, who might be the appropriate contacts to reach out to as well? So these, I think, are some of the questions to kind of think about to help kind of frame your approach, from a learning standpoint as well. And so what I'd like to do here is, focus on getting on the radar. And, what I'm doing here is we're going to kind of tie this back to some of the trends that I talked about earlier. So kind of bringing the context back into this. And these are different types of activities, potential activities that you could do or kind of build upon if you're doing them already to kind of get on the radar of the organizations to kind of ultimately get to the position where you can make the ask. So I think these opportunities, these are things that you can do both with audiences in your kind of who sphere and with audiences in the who do you want to know sphere. So it could be done with both. And as I mentioned before, I think these activities will really kind of put you in a stronger position to ultimately make the ask. Because you'll have more visibility with these organizations, and you'll be really kind of starting to kind of build or strengthen, or even amplify those relationships. And what I'll do as I go through these, I'll offer an example of what each of these can look like as well. So here we'll kind of start with this one. We're focusing on some of the trends around big bet opportunities and intermediary funding, and one thing to do is, to partner with other organizations in your field to kind of target or community to target, potential regional or national place-based initiatives, whether they're big bets or whether they're, coming from, intermediaries. It's like an example would be like what I mentioned before around the Aspen Opportunity Youth Forum. That's funding for, 35 different communities around the country, but bringing together a partnership of different nonprofit organizations and businesses together in each of those areas. So, one thing, an example here also would be, I mentioned before, Lever for Change has one of the programs that they're funding is the Gulf Futures Initiative, and that's a focus on, collective impact opportunities in the different Gulf states to come together and sort of make the pitch for funding. So it has that sort of community collective impact structure built into it. So there's a natural opportunity in that case. Obviously it's a different region than what we're talking about here, but to kind of come together, it's a natural opportunity for a collaboration and partnership. So like through research, what might be other opportunities for collaboration and partnership, sort of the power of many as opposed to trying to go this alone, especially with some of these kind of larger foundations that might have quite a few organizations, approaching them potentially as well. Another, activity here tied to, funder collaboratives and local impact investors and donors. Um, you know, one idea here is to kind of come together and kind of identify what are some of the priority topics for local funders and impact investors. What platforms might exist to kind of bring different funders together in a way to kind of demonstrate your work, your impact, and your thought leadership as well, and to really find a way to engage them in a conversation with you. So an example of this could be creating like a funder roundtable where, you bring together, let's say it's a group of funders, maybe it's working with in this case, Philanthropy DMV, which, naturally has access to a large group of funders in the region, and developing, a roundtable, let's say around, what are some key issues affecting educational access in the district region in Northern Virginia? Um, how might the work that we're doing in this area set the stage for a really good conversation with other potential funders on this topic too? So an example here would be actually the organization that I was with before, Equal Measure. We did this in Philadelphia. We're a nonprofit organization, and we developed a funder collaborative with Philanthropy Network Greater Philadelphia, which is sort of the Philanthropy DMV, but in the Philadelphia region. And the topic was, it was an exploration of what could local funders do to strengthen their focus on infusing a racial equity frame into their work, into their programming, and into their operations. And we brought together about 8 to 10 funders and really had that conversation. But it was an opportunity for Equal Measure to kind of share its expertise, its thought leadership, and become more visible in that context to these potential funders. And one thing that came out of it was one of the funders attending the roundtable reached out to the organization about four or 5 weeks later to say, hey, we'd like to fund, we'd like to bring you on to help develop work around making us a more racial equitable, kind of help us strengthen our racial equity practices for our local foundation as well. So that's kind of one activity to kind of get on their radar. Also, the trend here, tied to corporate funding, but also, municipal, regional, state, and federal funding as well. So, one activity here could be like, what are the networks locally, like regional chambers of commerce or regional economic development associations that we can get involved with here? Places where, people in a position to give from local businesses, where donors may be attending, or local policymakers may be attending. And this is an opportunity to meet them, start building relationships with them. It could be an opportunity to create programming for these organizations as well, to kind of show your visibility and sort of credibility on a particular topic. So different ways to kind of leverage your involvement in these organizations to kind of get on their radar as well. An example would be there's an organization local in the Philadelphia region, which is where I'm based, called Book Smiles. They're an organization that focuses on getting old used books and bringing them and kind of giving them to schools that need to expand the number of books in their libraries, or who don't have libraries, and kind of bring in different books to help create those libraries for those schools. It could be elementary schools, it could be high schools, it could be middle schools. And Book Smiles became heavily involved in the local Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey chambers of commerce and in regional economic development associations. And really over the past year and a half have brought in some significant funding from different corporations, different funders, different independent investors into the organization, because they got out there, they got involved. I think they did some programming, did a session around the work that they do, as well, and the need to build and kind of replenish libraries in the schools, particularly in underserved areas as well. So that's another example of how, in this case, Book Smiles got onto the radar of different corporations and different even municipal and state funders, and policymakers, because of their involvement in local organizations. trust-based philanthropy. Again, here's an opportunity to, again, this is, I think sometimes where the learning conversation comes into play that I talked about before. So, how open are local and regional funders to co-designing programs or kind of bringing you into the program design mix? Or might there be opportunities for you to kind of spur their interest in potential capacity building opportunities as well? So what are the opportunities for you to kind of get on their radar as a thought partner in their programming work? And so an example here would actually be with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, National Healthcare Foundation. So about 2 years ago, they developed a new investment around the value of caregiving. And the way that they went about this was, rather than kind of issue a standard call for a proposal and 50,000 organizations responded to become grantees, what they did was they really kind of opened it up to organizations that they wanted to get to know better, that were A, doing work around caregiving, but also B, working on how do we kind of shift the narrative around caregiving. And so it was an opportunity where RWJF invited these organizations to help them co-design this program. And ultimately they became the, I think, 6 grantees that are now part of this program. But it was an opportunity, again, kind of learning about what the foundation was up to, getting on their radar, and then ultimately being in a position to co-design a potential program. And the last activity here that I wanted to share is around sort of this kind of the newer generation of donors and what opportunities are there here. We talked a little bit about this when I was talking about the trends before, but opportunities here could be shadowing programs, board membership, creating a next generation advisory board or board of directors, being in social media spaces where they are, the TikToks and the Instagrams, engaging in different types of communications on those platforms. A lot of Gen Z folks right now are really into vlogs, video blogs. And are there ways for you to sort of take the work that you're doing and kind of make it more visual, to kind of appeal and kind of get them involved in your work? Are there volunteer opportunities that you could kind of further leverage as well? But it's kind of getting your organization on their radar as an organization that really is interested in and is focusing on and is cognizant about and is supportive of how Gen Z and millennial folks and potential donors are kind of thinking about the nonprofit space and their giving. So those are certain activities I shared. There might be other activities that you'd like to think about as well. And I think when we get to the worksheets and the tools, I think there'll be an opportunity to kind of think more about that and kind of take that back to your organization as well as you kind of think about your planning. So wanted to talk a little bit about the ask, and you could probably spend an entire session talking about the ask and messaging. And so we're not going to do that here. So what I wanted to do was kind of share a model that I like to use and have used before as a way, again, to kind of help think about and simplify how you go about doing this. Because again, like audience identification, when you get into messaging, there's like a ton of frameworks around that, lots of concepts, lots of theories. I think the more that you can kind of demystify that and kind of bring that back to your comfort level as an organization and practitioners, I think the more effective and successful you can be. So that's why I like to use this house model, as I call it. And you can kind of see how it works. Here, you have your key message and umbrella statement. In this case, I'm using a healthcare organization as an example. So our work demonstrates that cross-sector collaboration is a successful way to improve access to healthcare for underserved populations. That's the big umbrella statement. And then, of course, you want to put that into your own language. Here, you see these 3 pillars, sort of the supporting messages. These support that umbrella statement. You can kind of see them here. The important point here is that supporting message number 3 the call to action, that is your ask. So the ask is built into these 3 columns. And so the ask here is, we'd like to share with you our learnings and the impact of this cross-sector approach that we're talking about here. And we'd like to gauge your interest in funding to scale this important work. So that's a very specific ask, just sort of kind of building up to that point through the messaging here. And then as the foundation, you have supporting data and evidence, what supports this, what are the stories that we can share to kind of illustrate this message and ultimately the ask. And I think, and it's important to also include, to the extent that you can, when you think about story, stories from residents, stories from folks in the community that you're working in too. So it's not just, an organizational story or an organizational perspective. It's an organizational story that brings in the experiences and the perspectives of those in the community, those who are directly affected by the work that you're doing, and ultimately by the work that this organization that you're talking to could potentially fund. So what I'd like to do now is, open it, kind of bring it to open discussion. I think that'll be part of the Q&A. A couple questions that I have here, are how are current trends in philanthropy affecting your fundraising approaches? What other trends are you seeing? What are potential opportunities for you to expand or diversify your funding? And then how can the community foundations of Northern Virginia and then of Loudoun and Northern Fauquier potentially support you in your fundraising efforts as well? So I know we have about roughly 23 minutes or so. We could maybe spend a few minutes, getting your thoughts here, and then we can open it up to broader Q&A.
So I think what we're going to do is a combination of online comments and also in the room. So I don't know if anyone wants to reflect on these 2 questions that are in the room. I know that also Joanne may have some comments as well online. I think that if people can feel free to ask questions or answer them, but also if you have questions, we can go right into Q&A as well. If you want to write them also on the third cards and pens on your tables, if you want to write them on the board, and we'll collect them. There's a lot of information, but if you want.
Actually, we'll just.
No, I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly, but the reflection that I've had in this moment about the potential opportunity is basically to look at your report and find out people who won grants that are in the same area that I support. So when he started talking about the who, and the first thing I was thinking of, like, well, how would I know who if I don't know them yet? And then it dawned on me that people are often giving out their reports and telling you who won the grant. So everybody I lost to, I need to go out. But having that thought, everyone that I can go out and see how I can partner.
And the combo is getting all on the same page, trying to support as many people, as many organizations we possibly can actually. Anyone else? Do we have anybody? We have quite good, and it was a lot of information also, and as we said, we're going to be sending everyone both the recording and also all of the slides, so I think. Yeah. Good morning, thank you for sharing. I think in thinking about how the national trends are reflected in this community, in this region, I can speak from the Science Center's perspective for sure. When we look at corporate philanthropy, we are looking at the conversation about engagement
And what does that really mean to our companies that are here in terms of their employee resource groups, in terms of sharing their time, their talent, and their treasure. And so it becomes a holistic conversation about ways that they're looking to accomplish their goals. And so it isn't necessarily walking in and going, I need money. I know we need money, right?
Yeah.
But it's more about walking in and going, what are your goals? What are your employees looking for? How are you as a company looking to engage your employees or to show value to your employees that it's a good place to keep working? Because when we can offer those opportunities, volunteerism, leadership, mentoring, I know it's hard to say that from the Science Center perspective because we also align with a lot of our regional companies' missions. But those are more powerful and longer term conversations, because what happens, of course, in corporate philanthropy and corporate sponsorship is that your favorite person leaves and then the relationship is over. And so you have to look for opportunities to deepen the bench on your corporate partners. So employee resource groups have been an extraordinary opportunity to meet a lot of our goals as an organization and expand the connection to our companies.
Yeah.
And for the people that are online, people are having a hard time hearing the.
Yeah, so I think if you're gonna respond, just come stand up closer to our little owl, my owl guy, who's helping translate to our virtual guests.
I can also repeat, let me quickly repeat both comments. So one was around looking at the annual report of our foundations and seeing who else was funded, just to get a better idea of who is being funded and figure out if there are opportunities to connect with those organizations or have a better understanding of who the other corporate engagement and the value of really building relationships with the affinity groups at that company or the company itself, knowing that the staff there be maybe turnarounds. It's about engagement of company employees actually through volunteerism, donations. There are a lot of ways to engage companies and to think creatively about how to do that.
Yep.
There was. Well, if you want to speak loudly, that may be the best way, it sounds like.
Actually, I was thinking to kind of complement exactly what you're saying, it's a different way of looking at it. I think a lot of times internally in nonprofits, we've been creating our own programs and then seeking funding for those programs. But this is really kind of turning it on its head, right? Like we're going to create programs in collaboration with other corporations, other entities. I think there's a lot of growth and experience from that. However, I think in the short term, there's some more work involved in it. So it's really interesting to see that national trend of that collaborative effort and really looking at how we're changing that dynamic.
Yeah.
I also want to comment on one thing you said, Seth, because I think it's relevant too, is how you think about partnering with funders around alignment of priorities. So if you are focused on a certain community or issue area, that you have the expertise, you're with those residents in the, on the ground, and you have that live experience. So that is always very helpful to a foundation because that's not what we're doing. So I think figuring out kind of what our areas of focus are and then connecting with us and saying, oh, this is what we do. And maybe there's an opportunity for us to partner with you. I think it was a great suggestion. Yes, Joanne.
And we have a comment from online, from one of our nonprofits in Loudoun County, that is shared a couple of different things. That they partner closely with the Loudoun County Public School administrators to incubate programs, two of which are the emerging workforce development through industry and specific academies, as well as human service needs of the students through wraparound services and supports. Building a great relationship with the Community Foundation for Loudoun and Northern Fauquier. I'm reading. I'm not gonna. Perhaps the regional community foundations could have an open invitation for set dates for showcasing of nonprofit programs. We can always reach out individually for set times and learning sessions, but even regular check-ins for capacity challenges, maybe within a Google form or intermediate and long-term priorities were some ideas that were given. And then we also had partnerships that help solve needs for both organizations are the absolute best. That came from,
Oh, Amanda.
Oh, I was going to, hi, everybody, I'm Victoria Beats. I was going to comment on, sort of a broader trend, around donor retention. So I'm on the consulting side, but we see so many of our clients and national trends really showing slippage in terms of repeat donors, and just wanted to hear if anybody's seeing that in the room. And what I would also say is that Giving USA shared with us that historically only about 5 to 6% of dollars each year come from corporations nationally, but in this region, we know that it's far beyond that. And so while that pie chart is incredibly iconic, right, that pie chart, but you should know what your own pie chart looks like, and you know, see where the gaps are.
Great point.
I want to make sure, did people online hear that, or did you heard that well, Seth?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Great. Joanne.
all right, so lots of people liking the idea of the collaboration and getting together with the community foundations being a hub for that. In addition, it's is to hosting, partnering, get-togethers based on what your nonprofit area covers, such as education, healthcare, and immigration services. And then there's a lot of people seeing trends in potential funders seeking corporate and nonprofit project partnering for grant funding.
Any other thoughts in the room? Okay. Well, first of all, the reason we did this was because we wanted to create opportunities for networking and opportunities to partner with us and also with one another. So actually, it speaks to what people's desires are, and I hope that we are able, as the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia, to continue to offer these types of opportunities. I know, and Nicole, our partner, the reason we called Nicole and the Community Foundation for Loudoun and Fauquier counties was because this is what they do. They do a lot of this capacity building. And so we recognize that we are dipping our toe in, and we are providing to some organizations in our region, but we love the partnering opportunity. And I thank Nicole for that. And I'd like to ask Nicole to come up here, and we'll kind of, oh, actually, before we do that, I realize this, Seth wants to show you the tools, right, Seth?
Real quick. Yeah. Just
Okay. Because I think they will be helpful. And we'll, by the way, again, we will send all of this out, so you will have access to everything, both the recording and also the actual tools themselves. But go for it.
Thanks, Sari. Yeah, just real quick. So yes, I want to share there are 3 tools here. One, we started working on a little bit, before. This is like focuses on the audience sphere. So, it's a way to catalog who do you know, who do you want to know, the 4 questions that we talked about here. And again, you can customize and tailor all of these to the organizations as well. This worksheet focuses on a specific target organization or individual. And again, this could be from either sphere. What's your relationship? Why might you want to approach them? And then what's the potential timing for that too? So you're kind of getting all that information all in one place. And then lastly, here's that house model that we talked about just before. You can use this to help kind of think through, what are your message, what's your overarching message, and then ultimately, what is your ask as well too. So just kind of having these 3 tools kind of based on what we talked about here, they're at your disposal. You can kind of use them as you wish, but I think these are, hopefully will help kind of spur further thinking as well. And yeah, before I just hand it to Sari and to Nicole, just wanted to thank everybody here. I covered a lot. We'd probably go like another 3 more hours, but I would think we'll let you have the rest of your day. But if you have any additional questions or any topics here that you'd like to kind of talk about more deeply, feel free to reach out. You can see my email there up on the screen as well. But again, just wanted to thank everybody. I wanted to thank Renee, Tara, Sari, Nicole, Amanda, Gabby, and everyone who was, instrumental in putting this together. And of course, everyone who was able to attend in person and also certainly online. So Sari, I'm going to toss it to you.
So the Community Foundation has a number of open grant opportunities right now, especially for nonprofits serving Loudoun. I don't know, Joanne, do you want to speak to a couple of those?
Sure. All right, so we can.
And let me introduce Joanne. She's our Director of Grants and Nonprofit Programs at the Community Foundation. So if you have any questions about these grant opportunities, she's your person.
All right, so the Loudoun Impact Fund opens September 7th and closes October 7th. And its granting priorities are youth and children, older adults, and people living with disabilities. 100 Women Strong has an LOI process, so like step 1, that's due October 4th, so that's this week. And then the invitations to apply will be announced by December 16th-ish. And their priorities are shelter, health and mental health, hunger and education. And coming soon, so these are still yet to be announced, but very, very soon, be on the lookout. The Chamber Foundation, the Loudoun Chamber Foundation specifically, with granting priorities focused on economic development, entrepreneurship, education and workforce development, public safety and healthy community, enhancing healthy communities. And then one of our really unique grant opportunities is Forward Turn. And this is where we invite applicants that have youth-led initiatives to apply. We want the youth to apply. They can collaborate with the, if there's a nonprofit, an adult, but we want the youth applications, and the grant makers are a team of youth leaders in the community that come together. We teach them how to be grant makers. They read those applications. It's really very special to teach them about what it's like to become a funder. So those are the upcomings.
And then the Community Foundation for Loudoun Northern Fauquier counties also offers a number of nonprofit training and capacity building programs. There's a series here. If you want, you can give, if you're not already on our mailing list, you can give Joanne your card and she's happy to add you. Our Nonprofit Academy is a quarterly workshop series on nonprofit management topics that we host in partnership with the Loudoun Chamber of Commerce. We've got one more coming up for the year to be announced, but it'll probably be in early December. We're looking at doing one on understanding financial statements, so stay tuned for that. Our Racial Equity Framework is an annual program where we explore different topics related to racial justice, accessibility, inclusion. Our Social Impact Institute is our deeper dive series for capacity building opportunities. The one we've got going right now is a 6-month coaching program for nonprofit development staff, where you get individual and group coaching. That one's closed for now, but stay tuned. We offer new and different things every single year. And then Give Choose is our annual online fundraising day. I know many of you participate in that. So if you're a nonprofit serving Loudoun or Northern Fauquier counties, you're eligible to participate. It's free to participate. Our registration will open for that in December. The big day is on March 25th, 2020. I should say 2025. That's my mistake. So we also do a training in January to help all of our participants, plan out their fundraising campaigns. It's a really good exercise, and not just fundraising for that day, but to put together a donor stewardship, cultivation, and solicitation program.
We have a question from online that I think should be directed at both of you.
Okay.
So it's a global question.
Sure.
How do we connect with the community foundations to help with capacity building?
Well, I can speak for us. So Joanne Trimmer is our point of contact for all of our local nonprofits, and we take meetings every single day with local organizations. So if you want to connect with Joanne, she would be happy to sit down and schedule like a 30-minute Zoom or in-person session with you. We love to learn more about your missions, because not only does it help us to tell you about our grant opportunities you can apply for, we also steward more than 100 donor advised funds. And while we're not going to solicit necessarily for you to those donors, we like to have the information on hand, so that if a donor comes to us and say, hey, I'm really interested in making some grants to these 5 areas, tell me more about the nonprofits in our community doing that work, Joanne is ready to go and prepared to share that information. So you contact Joanne and she'd be happy to not only get you on our mailing list, but like learn more about your mission in more depth.
And we actually offer the same exact customer service, truthfully, and I meet with organizations actually, usually the first Tuesday of every month. I have a Zoom link that I send out and I have 30-minute calls. Actually, my colleague Jennifer Cochran, who many of you probably have been in contact with, also she facilitates our grant making as well. And so where there's an open door policy, we'd love to hear from you, learn more about who you are. It helps us do our work better, of course. And again, for us, we also have donor advised funds. I will say this, just to be completely transparent, donor advisors historically know where they want their dollars to go. However, it's really important for us to be educated about who's out there, right? So if the questions are asked about who's doing work in this area, we have those answers, right? And so it's important for us to have those conversations with all of you and to truly understand and what if there are changes happening, if there are things you're seeing that we should be aware of. So those conversations are extremely valuable. I would also say that for us from a grant making, and I don't know, are we the next slide? Yeah, okay. Hold on 1 second. Great, okay. So two quick things about grant making. Our Business Women's Giving Circle closed the process deadline closed yesterday. So for those of you who applied, we'll be in touch. And then, but most importantly, our Raise the Region Gala is October 18th. It's a very fun event. Hopefully many of you have attended, and if not, please join us. And information about the Raise the Region Gala and also our Shape of the Region Conference, which hopefully you have attended as well. This year it's going to be focused around children and youth in our region, and it's March 13th. Stay tuned for more info as well. And then our grant making is next slide. Okay, grant making. So most of you are probably familiar with this, but the way we do our grant making is our core grant making processes all happen at the same time. So basically in January, we launched through a webinar all of our focus areas for 2025. And we also have an environment fund and an arts fund. And then our core areas, everything from child and youth development and education, military personnel and their families, aging in place, mental health. And we will be announcing all the focus areas we'll be focusing on and also the funding availability for this year. And again, January 8th, 2025, we will be announcing all of that, and the process will be through the spring with the announcements happening at the beginning of May. Next slide. And then if you have any questions about either meeting with us, as I said earlier, or our events or grant making, please reach out either to me or to Jennifer Cochran, my colleague. Unfortunately, she's not well today. She wasn't able to attend, but we are both very accessible, similar to Nicole and Joanne, and we look forward to having conversations with you. And I just want to quickly just say, Nicole, it's a pleasure to work with you. And I think this is the way we should be doing business, right? Working together and partnering, and hopefully offering you an opportunity to learn more information that will help you do your work better. Quickly, we will be offering 2 other capacity building sessions. One in November, featuring someone named Peter Patapento. It's going to be around communications and media relations. And then we'll be offering another one in January prior to our grant making process around financial sustainability and preparing financials for our grant processes. So stay tuned for those, but we are dipping our toe, as you can see, into capacity building, both individually by individual conversations, but also through these educational sessions. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to Seth for all of your great information. And I know that everyone was feverishly taking notes, which is awesome. And if you, again, as I said, we'll be sending out an email with all this information and also a survey. So please feel free to fill out the survey, or please do fill out the survey. And we look forward to continuing to provide some of these services to the nonprofit community. So thank you.
Thank you.